You know, if you walk into a dark room and you stub your toe on a heavy wooden table, it hurts, like a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst.
Right. And in that moment, the table is just, it's there, it's dense, it's physical. And that pain shooting up your leg is basically the universe's way of reminding you that matter is undeniably real.
Yeah, stub your toe, the table wins every time.
Exactly. But if you step into the realm of radical philosophical idealism, that solid wooden table starts to look, a lot less solid.
It really does. It stops being this fixed object and becomes, well, a projection.
Right, which is wild, because today we are looking at a landscape of reality that entirely inverts the way most of us navigate the physical world.
Yeah, it really forces this complete epistemological crisis.
Yeah.
Because if you assume the physical world is the baseline reality-like, the
Yeah.
foundation that our minds simply wander through, you're working off the standard materialist playbook.
The default setting for most of us, basically.
Exactly. But the essay we're unpacking in today's deep dive, it strips that foundation right down to the studs.
Yeah, we have a singular, highly provocative source text today for you to chew on. It's an essay titled Consciousness Determines Existence. And it's by a writer named Zhu Feng.
And I think it's important to point out right away, this isn't just a rehash of, like, Kantian idealism or Cartesian thought experiment.
Right, like the old, are we just a brain in a vat kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Not that. The author takes a really militant stance on this age-old debate between mind and matter.
He does. He argues that consciousness is the ultimate literal architect of reality. Like, it's not just a lens we view the world through, but the brute force builder of the world itself.
Which is a massive claim. And our mission for this deep dive isn't to, objectively prove or disprove his cosmological framework.
Right. We're not here to say he's definitely right or definitely wrong.
Exactly. We're just here to map out the internal logic of it.
Yeah.
We're going to put on his glasses for the next 15 minutes and just see the world how he sees it.
So to even begin to comprehend how a thought could supposedly forge a physical reality, we kind of have to look at how he categorizes the human mind first.
Yeah, because the text argues that before we can debate mind versus matter, we really have to acknowledge the gravity of the physical world and how tethered different minds are to that gravity.
Right, and he builds this hierarchy. He breaks humanity down into 5 distinct tiers of awareness.
He does.
And it's fascinating to read because it doesn't read like a simple list. It's more like an escape velocity chart.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like it maps how much thrust it takes for a mind to break free from the pull of physical existence.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So the baseline, what he calls the first tier, is the ignorant people.
A bit of a harsh title, but yeah.
Very blunt, yeah. In his framework, these are individuals driven entirely by biological survival instinct.
So food, shelter, that kind of thing.
Exactly. To them, physical existence possesses absolute ontological primacy. If you strip away their physical environment, their consciousness essentially flatlines.
Because their only mental bandwidth is allocated to acquiring the next meal, surviving the elements. There's no room for deep philosophical thought.
Right. The physical world holds 100% of the gravity for them.
Okay, so that's tier 1.
Yeah.
The second tier shifts slightly, though, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's still pretty heavily anchored. He calls this group the Laïties.
Yeah, the Laïties. This tier is driven by desire rather than pure survival.
We're talking about, like, wanting stuff.
Exactly. The pursuit of wealth, social status, reputation, aesthetic beauty. The text argues that a person in this category derives their entire sense of self from the accumulation of matter.
So their daily routine and, I guess, their internal happiness are entirely dictated by the seduction of external physical things.
You nailed it. Without money or societal status to chase, their consciousness would have no direction whatsoever. Existence is completely determining their mindset.
Wow. Okay, moving up to the third tier. This is where a lot of us might naturally place ourselves, I think, or at least we'd recognize the people around us.
Yeah, definitely. He calls this group the mortals.
And they aren't driven just by survival or money. They're driven by affection and relationships.
Right. The core focus here is the family unit, your friend group, colleagues, maybe even the nation state. They find meaning in life through these external social structures.
But there's a vulnerability there, according to the author.
A huge one. He says that if you remove those physical and social networks, the mortal feels this overwhelming void of loneliness and boredom.
So their consciousness is, like, slightly more abstract than the second tier, but it still relies heavily on external existence to prevent a total existential collapse.
Exactly. So for those first three tiers, materialism reigns supreme. The physical world is firmly in the driver's seat, dictating how the mind reacts.
I was reading this and I kept thinking about a video game skill tree.
Oh, how so?
Well, like when you start a survival game at level 1, your entire perspective is consumed by just finding food so your health bar doesn't drop to 0.
Right, you're just trying not to die.
Exactly. The physics engine is your master. But as you unlock higher tiers, like moving from basic survival to getting gold to building alliances, your whole perspective on what the game world actually is begins to shift.
That analogy holds up perfectly, especially when we transition to the fourth tier, which he calls the sages.
The sages, okay.
These are the scientists, the philosophers, the deep thinkers driven by reason. A sage recognizes the physics engine of the game, like you said, but they are no longer just reacting to
Or
it.
studying its code.
Yes. They view physical existence and consciousness as holding equal weight. They dissect the material world specifically to uncover the underlying mental or mathematical essence behind it.
Which is a huge leap from Tier 1. But then that brings us to the absolute peak of his hierarchy.
Right, Tier 5. This belongs to the saints, or immortals.
And these individuals are driven purely by spirituality.
Completely. The text argues that to a saint, the empirical data gathered by the eyes or ears or hands is fundamentally trivial.
Just noise, basically.
Yeah. The only true reality is what is realized through spiritual perception. For them, consciousness dictates existence in its entirety.
So matter is just a downstream byproduct of thought.
Exactly. That's the ultimate goal in his system.
Okay, but I have to push back on this framework for a second, because setting up the board this way feels incredibly convenient for the author.
I mean, I can see why you'd say that.
Right, like reserving the correct view of the universe exclusively for some mystical elite class of saints, while categorizing the vast majority of human beings as, oblivious or hopelessly trapped by base desires. It borders on extreme philosophical arrogance.
It is an intensely aggressive categorization, no doubt. But if we analyze the rhetorical mechanics of the essay here, this hierarchy actually serves as a preemptive structural defense mechanism.
Like a shield against criticism.
Exactly. The author knows that claiming the mind creates the physical world sounds totally absurd to a materialist.
Yeah, if you tell me I imagined my car into existence, I'm going to look at you like you're crazy.
Right. And he explicitly writes that explaining idealism to the lower tiers is like casting pearls before swine.
Oh, wow. Okay, then.
Yeah, so by structuring humanity this way, he completely insulates his philosophy from criticism. If you reject his premise that consciousness creates reality, his framework automatically classifies you as someone whose mind is simply too anchored by physical gravity to perceive the truth.
It's a totally closed-loop argument. If you disagree with him, you just aren't a high enough level to understand the game code yet.
That is exactly how it functions, yeah.
So, moving from the who to the how, if these fifth-tier saints believe that consciousness creates reality, how does the author actually attempt to prove this mechanism to the rest of us?
Well, he doesn't just leave it in the realm of mysticism. He grounds it in a very tangible argument about human creation.
He directs our attention to the built environment.
He does. He asks the reader to consider the origin of a car, a skyscraper, or even a modern highway system.
Because these complex structures didn't just spontaneously generate through random geological processes.
Exactly. The text asserts that before a car ever displaced physical air on a physical road, it had to exist in its entirety as an abstract concept in a human brain.
It's like a blueprint analogy. I mean, if you are listening to this right now, look at the physical environment around you.
The device projecting this audio, the glass in your windows.
The synthetic fibers in your clothing. Every single artificial object in your field of vision was literally conjured from a thought.
It was a conceptual blueprint in an imagination before it ever colonized physical space.
Right. Without the prerequisite of human consciousness, the Earth would just be an untouched sphere of raw biology and geology.
And the author uses that exact logical progression to establish the ontological primacy of thought.
So humans don't simply rearrange matter.
No, we impose our internal consciousness onto the physical world. We force matter to conform to our imagination. Therefore, the physical state of modern Earth is actually a lagging indicator of human consciousness.
That's a really compelling way to phrase it, but the text escalates this concept significantly, doesn't it?
Oh, it really scales up.
Because if an individual thought creates an individual object, like a chair or a smartphone, what happens when millions of minds operate simultaneously?
Right. The author takes this localized idea of creation and applies it to entire societies, arguing that collective consciousness is what physically builds and shapes global cultures.
Okay, and I think we really need to pause here for a second and just, give a quick disclaimer to you listeners.
Yeah, absolutely necessary here.
Because this is where we encounter the most controversial and highly charged section of the text. The author relies on some incredibly sweeping, frankly stereotypical cultural generalizations to make this point.
He really does.
And we are just neutrally reporting his claims to map out his philosophical framework. We are definitely not endorsing these cultural generalizations.
Exactly. We are looking at the structural load-bearing beams of his argument, regardless of how biased or historically blind the cultural paint he uses might be.
Right. So with that in mind, what is the evidence he uses in the text to prove this collective consciousness idea?
Well, for instance, he claims to have spent a decade observing residential environments in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And he contrasts the homes of Caucasians in the region, describing them as impeccably manicured, floral, and pristine, with his observations of Chinese living spaces.
Which he characterizes differently, I imagine.
Very differently. He describes them as inherently chaotic, overgrown, and messy. He even throws in an anecdote about his son visiting New York's Chinatown and feeling that its physical degradation just didn't match the surrounding prosperity of Manhattan.
The pivotal question the author is trying to ask here is, why does this physical discrepancy exist?
Right. Now, a materialist would point to economic disparities, historical redlining, or systemic resource allocation.
The practical realities of living in those spaces.
Exactly. But the author rejects all of that entirely. He argues the discrepancy is rooted entirely in the differing collective consciousness of the residents.
So his premise is that if you place a population with a chaotic, disorganized collective consciousness into a pristine physical environment,
the physical environment will inevitably degrade and warp to mirror their internal state.
wow. To use a tech analogy, it's like installing a malware-ridden, chaotic operating system into a brand new, high-end computer.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
Like, the hardware is pristine, but the software will cause the fans to overheat, the memory to crash, and the physical machine to eventually break down to match the dysfunction of the code running it.
That perfectly captures his radical determinism. And he applies this same logic to urban planning, too.
How so?
The text compares the city layout of Harar in Zimbabwe with Beijing. He observes that Harar features distinctly compartmentalized zones, commercial, industrial, and residential areas heavily separated by space.
Okay, and Beijing.
Beijing, conversely, is described as having these zones heavily intertwined, like a massive concrete web of overlapping functions.
And again, he just completely bypasses centuries of geopolitical history, imperial development, population density, metro.
Of it, ignored.
Just to claim that the concrete layout of Beijing is simply a physical mirror of a chaotic Chinese collective consciousness, while Harar's layout reflects a compartmentalized British colonial mentality.
Yep. And he even scales this up to global political achievements.
Right, I remember this part. He questions why the United States produces so many Nobel laureates in the sciences, and why its political system structurally limits a president to 2 terms.
While comparing it to other nations, specifically pointing to mainland China at the time of his writing, which struggle to produce Nobel winners or have leaders who consolidate power indefinitely.
I really have to push back here because the historical blind spots are just staggering.
Oh, they are massive.
He is boiling down centuries of complex economic leverage, educational infrastructure, and systemic power dynamics into a simplistic claim that, like, Americans and Chinese just think differently, therefore their governments look different.
Yeah, it's a huge leap.
It feels like a massive logical failure to ignore the physical realities of economics.
It is a massive oversimplification, definitely. But it's a necessary one for his philosophical engine to run.
Because if he admits economics play a part.
Exactly. If he concedes that a poor economy, which is a physical, material reality, shapes a culture's behavior, he admits that existence determines consciousness.
And his entire model would just collapse.
Right. He has to maintain absolutism. Mindset is the root cause of all physical reality, no matter how complex or systemic the society appears.
It is a fascinating, if stubborn, display of intellectual commitment.
It really is.
But he does provide a slightly more universally resonant historical example to prove how collective consciousness alters physical reality, focusing on the human body itself.
Yeah, this part is really interesting. He looks at women's fashion during the Chinese Cultural Revolution versus the modern era.
Right, because during the Cultural Revolution, the prevailing collective consciousness was deeply restrictive.
Highly orthodox, fiercely suspicious of individuality, and the physical reality of the era mirrored that psychological restriction perfectly.
Women were basically relegated to wearing drab, uniform colors, mostly yellow, gray, or blue.
Skirts and high heels were absolutely forbidden. The text details how women went to great lengths to physically bind their chests, hiding their natural curves.
Because if a woman displayed any physical shape or stylistic flair, she risked being labeled a foxy spirit, right?
Yeah, a dangerous, restless disruptor of the societal order. The physical body was treated as a canvas for the collective consciousness of oppression.
But contrast that with the physical reality of fashion in the author's modern era.
Right. Today, the collective mindset celebrates personal freedom, economic mobility, individuality.
And consequently, the streets are flooded with diverse, vibrant styles.
The author describes modern women displaying curvaceous beauty in colorful clothing, actually comparing them to fairies descending from heaven.
Which is such vivid imagery, because clothes in this context aren't just fabrics stitched together in a factory.
No, they're not.
Fashion is a phenomenological projection. It's a physical barometer for society's psychological freedom.
The mind of the era literally drapes itself over the physical bodies of the people living in it.
It is a highly visceral way to demonstrate idealism.
It really makes you think about what your own clothes say about your mind, doesn't it?
For sure. But as the text builds toward its climax, the focus narrows from these sweeping societal analyses down to the trajectory of the individual.
Which is where the philosophy directly confronts you, the listener, and your own life. It poses a critical question. What happens when your internal consciousness clashes with external pragmatism?
The author shares a story about a college student to illustrate this. This student had a very specific, highly material vision for his future.
Right. His dream was to move to the United States, purchase a luxurious villa with a sprawling green lawn, swim in his private pool, and drive a Mercedes-Benz.
A very clear blueprint in his mind. But a newspaper critic caught wind of this student's ambitions and wrote a scathing article mocking him.
Yeah, the critic accused the student of indulging in wishful thinking, advising him to abandon these unrealistic fantasies, be down to earth, and face reality.
And in the author's framework, this critic is acting as the ultimate avatar for materialism.
100%. His advice is essentially, survey your current physical limitations, accept them as absolute, and shrink your mental expectations until they fit perfectly inside that physical box.
And the author's reaction to this critic is just visceral. He fiercely defends the student and attacks the critic, labeling him a frog at the bottom of a well.
Which is an old idiom, for anyone who doesn't know, describing someone who looks up at the sky through a tiny opening and assumes the sky is only a few feet wide.
Right. The author goes as far as to classify the critic's pragmatic advice as fundamentally evil. Which, I mean, calling someone evil for advising a kid to be realistic seems incredibly harsh.
It sounds extreme, yeah.
But within his framework, why is pragmatism a moral failing?
Because pragmatism demands that you accept the current physical limit as the ultimate boundary of possibility. To the author, telling someone to face reality cruelly oppresses their spirituality.
It collapses the wave function of their potential.
Precisely. If consciousness is the engine that creates existence, then artificially limiting your consciousness guarantees a limited, mediocre physical existence.
So the author's advice to the student is absolute. If you can vividly conceptualize the villa and the Mercedes, your physical actions will subconsciously and inevitably align to manifest that reality.
The behavior is pulled forward by the gravity of the consciousness.
And this localized idea of, like, manifesting a car is the runway the author uses to launch into the truly cosmic stakes of the essay.
The escalation is breathtaking, honestly.
Yeah. We move from the layout of a messy kitchen to city zoning to fashion, and suddenly we are staring down 36-dimensional cosmic immortality.
It's quite the leap. The author's grand conclusion is that if you operate under the materialist assumption that existence determines consciousness, you are willingly enslaving yourself to reality.
You are mathematically doomed to navigate the friction and pain of this one singular three-dimensional Earth, age, and permanently die.
Because your mind cannot conceive of anything beyond your physical sensory input.
But flipping the paradigm unlocks the universe.
It does. If you firmly adopt the belief that consciousness determines existence, you break the tether to the physical world. The text asserts that reality is not limited to our empirical three-dimensional plane. It claims there are actually 36 dimensional spaces.
Wait, 36 dimensions? How does he even justify that within this framework?
Well, think of consciousness like a radio receiver and projector.
Okay.
A materialist is permanently tuned to the AM dial of physical survival. They can only hear static if they try to tune elsewhere. But a fifth-tier saint, whose consciousness is no longer anchored by the gravity of physical matter, can twist the dial.
Oh, I see. Because if your mind is the architect of reality, expanding your perceptual frequency allows you to literally tune into or generate higher dimensional spaces.
Exactly. By visualizing a reality beyond physical limitations, you decipher the underlying code of space and time,
You extend your existence into infinite realms.
effectively transcending biological mortality by realizing that the physical body was never the true seat of your existence anyway. The mind survives because the mind is the environment.
That is just... It's the ultimate pitch for radical idealism.
It really is.
Yeah.
It demands that we stop viewing ourselves as passive observers wandering through a pre-rendered universe and recognize our profound responsibility as the active projectors of it.
Which is a beautiful thought, but it leaves us with a lingering epistemological puzzle.
A friction point, yeah.
Right. One that the text doesn't quite resolve, but one that is kind of impossible to ignore after absorbing all this.
What's that?
Well, if human consciousness is a projector constantly dictating physical reality, what happens when two people with completely opposing, mutually exclusive visions of reality are forced to share the exact same physical space?
Oh, wow. It creates a collision of idealism.
Exactly. If you and I are both projecting the world whose consciousness possesses the stronger signal to overwrite the other...
That really makes you reconsider that heavy wooden table from the very beginning of our analysis.
It does. If you walk into a dark room and stub your toe, maybe the pain isn't proof that the table is made of unyielding, objective matter.
Maybe you stubbed your toe, because whoever designed, built, and placed that table in the room simply possessed a much stronger, denser consciousness than you do.
A haunting thought to keep in mind the next time you try to navigate your house in the dark.
Truly. Good luck with that.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration into the architecture of the mind. Keep questioning the blueprints around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.